At the hospital, the doctor starts another shift without imagining what the day will bring. Between appointments, she is surprised by a wolf that invades the emergency room with something unexpected on its nose. As she approaches, the doctor discovers a baby, fragile and shrouded in mystery which defies all explanations. She takes on the mission of protecting the child, without imagining the connection with a plot between past and present. The sun was just beginning to peek between the buildings of Silver Springs, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. The cobblestone streets, silent witnesses to so many stories, remained almost deserted at this early hour. Only the occasional street sweeper or early rising baker broke the stillness of dawn. And of course there was Wolf. His grey fur blended with the shadows as he slipped between alleys with the caution that only years of survival can teach. His amber eyes, bright and alert, constantly scanned his surroundings. He was no ordinary animal. His bearing, despite years on the street, maintained a certain nobility, and in his gaze there was an intelligence that went beyond animal instinct. The collar that had once adorned his neck had left a mark, a lighter line in his fur that told a silent story of belonging and subsequent abandonment. Memories of his previous life appeared in fragments, the warmth of a home, kind voices, a melody he couldn't forget. But those days were long gone, buried under layers of survival and loneliness. This morning, however, something was different. The air carried a distinct scent, a mixture of milk and talcum powder that clashed with the usual smell of garbage and decomposing food. Wolf followed the trail, his curiosity stronger than his usual caution. The sound came first, a faint whimper barely distinguishable from the murmur of the awakening city. Behind some trash containers, partially hidden by damp cardboard boxes, he found the source, a small bundle wrapped in a faded blue blanket. Wolf's heart raced as he recognized the scent. A human baby. Memories of his own childhood among humans surged with renewed force, mixing with a protective instinct he didn't even know he possessed. The baby was cold, too cold. Its small lips had a bluish tint that Wolf, without fully understanding, knew wasn't normal. Gently, using his muzzle, he tried to move the blanket to better cover the little one. It was then that he noticed something shiny, a silver necklace with a strange symbol intertwined in the blanket. The decision was instantaneous, arising from that place where instincts blend with memory. He knew where the hospital was. He had seen it during his nightly wanderings, had observed people coming and going, had perceived the smell of medicines and disinfectant. With extreme care, he took the blanket between his teeth, making sure not to harm the baby. The hospital was several blocks away. Wolf ran through streets that were starting to wake up, dodging the first cars and early pedestrians who moved aside, frightened as they saw him pass. Some shouted, others tried to shoo him away, but he maintained his course, determined. The automatic doors of the hospital opened with a hiss as he approached. Chaos was immediate. A nurse screamed, a security guard reached for his radio, and the few patients in the waiting room stood up alarmed. Wolf stood firm, holding his precious cargo, his eyes desperately searching for someone who could understand. That's when he saw her, a young woman in a white coat with black hair tied in a messy ponytail. There was something in her gaze, a mixture of compassion and determination that reminded him of someone from his past. Dr. Sarah Rivers had been finishing her shift when she heard the commotion. "Wait!" Sarah shouted when she saw the guard approaching, with intentions of scaring the animal away. "There's something in its mouth." Sarah approached slowly, her eyes fixed on Wolf's. The animal remained still, barely breathing, as if understanding that this moment was crucial. When the doctor was close enough, Wolf gently deposited the bundle on the ground, stepping back just a pace to allow her to approach. "Oh my God!" Sarah exclaimed upon discovering the baby. "I need an emergency team here right now." The next few minutes were a whirlwind of activity. The baby was quickly transferred to a gurney, connected to monitors, and surrounded by medical staff. Wolf watched everything from a prudent distance, refusing to leave the place despite the staff's attempts to shoo him away. Sarah, while coordinating the baby's care, couldn't stop observing the wolf. There was something about its behavior that defied all logic. The mark on its neck, now visible under the fluorescent hospital light, told a story she was determined to uncover. The baby was stabilized thanks to the rapid intervention. It was a boy of approximately 3 months, dehydrated and hypothermic, but responding well to treatment. When Sarah finally had a moment to examine the blanket, she found the necklace with the symbol. She held it up to the light, studying the intricate design that gave her an unsettling sense of familiarity. "Where did you come from, little one?" she murmured, directing her gaze towards Wolf, who was still sitting patiently in a corner of the emergency room. The animal looked her directly in the eyes, and for a moment, Sarah felt she could see beyond that animal gaze, as if there was an entire story waiting to be discovered. Hours passed, and as the baby recovered in the neonatal intensive care unit, Sarah found herself torn between her professional duty and her growing curiosity about the mysterious wolf and the necklace. She made some preliminary calls to social services and the police, but something told her this case was more complex than it appeared at first glance. At the end of her shift, exhausted but unable to go home, Sarah sat on a bench outside the hospital. To her surprise, Wolf approached and sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance but clearly seeking her company. "You have a story to tell too, don't you?" Sarah whispered, noticing how the first rays of the new day began to illuminate the city. The wolf tilted its head slightly, as if understanding her words. What neither of them knew at that moment was that this chance encounter on a spring morning was just the beginning of a story that would change their lives forever. The necklace that Sarah kept in the pocket of her coat was more than a simple piece of jewelry. It was the key that would open the door to a mystery that had remained hidden for years. As the sun rose completely in the sky, bathing the city in golden light, Sarah made a decision. She couldn't explain why, but she knew she had to protect both the baby and the wolf. There was something about this whole situation that resonated deeply within her, like a half-forgotten melody struggling to be remembered. In the streets of Silver Springs, life continued its normal course. Tourists began to fill the cobblestone streets, street vendors hawked their wares, and the bells of the local church rang out calling for mass. But in a corner of the hospital, a doctor, a wolf, and an abandoned baby were about to embark on an adventure that none of them could have imagined. Fate had intertwined their paths in an inexplicable way, and although none of them knew it yet, their lives would never be the same again. The first chapter of their story was just beginning to be written, and the secrets that the necklace held were about to emerge, bringing with them revelations that would shake the foundations of everything they thought they knew. The constant sound of heart monitors accompanied Sarah as she reviewed the baby's test results for the third time. 3 days had passed since the extraordinary rescue, and although the little one was improving rapidly, questions multiplied instead of finding answers. Wolf had become a constant presence in the hospital, to the surprise and consternation of the staff. Against all odds, the hospital director, Dr. Johnson, had allowed his presence after Sarah passionately argued about the animal's unusually docile behavior and its apparent connection to the case. "It doesn't make sense," Sarah muttered, studying the necklace under the light of her desk. The symbol, an intricate design that mixed a crescent moon with what appeared to be ancient keys, gave her an increasingly strong sense of déjà vu. Her fingers unconsciously traced the contour of the medallion while her mind wandered to childhood memories in the city. A soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. It was Emily, the head nurse of pediatrics, with a worried expression. "Dr. Rivers, there's a man asking about the baby. He says he's from Child Protective Services, but there's something that doesn't sit right with me." Sarah immediately stood up, tucking the necklace into her coat pocket. "Did he show identification?" "Yes, it looks official, but—" Emily lowered her voice. "Wolf hasn't stopped growling since he arrived." This detail alerted Sarah. Over the past few days, Wolf had proven to be extraordinarily calm, even with the constant coming and going of strangers. His aggressive behavior was completely unusual. Upon reaching the reception, Sarah observed the visitor, a middle-aged man in an impeccable suit with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Wolf, normally serene, was showing his teeth from a corner, his fur bristling. "Dr. Frank Thompson, Child Protective Services," the man introduced himself, extending a hand that Sarah shook cautiously. "We're following up on the abandoned baby case." "Of course," Sarah responded, maintaining a professional tone while studying the man. "Although it's curious, as we've been in contact with the assigned social worker, Mrs. Carter." A flash of something, irritation, alarm, crossed the man's face before his smile widened. "Ah, yes, I'm her supervisor." "We're very interested in this particular case." As the man spoke, Sarah noticed that his eyes constantly drifted towards Wolf, with a look that seemed more of recognition than fear. The animal, for its part, hadn't stopped growling, its posture increasingly tense. "Would you mind showing me your identification again?" Sarah requested, buying time while her mind worked at full speed. The man reached into his jacket, and for a moment Sarah thought she saw the glint of something metallic that didn't look like a badge. It was then that a melody began to play from the pediatric area. A nurse had put on music for the children. The reaction was instantaneous. Wolf stopped growling and perked up his ears, his attention completely captured by the music. "Doctor." Thompson also seemed affected, visibly paling. "That melody," Sarah whispered, finally recognizing it. It was an ancient lullaby, the same one her grandmother used to hum, a melody that spoke of guardian wolves and ancestral secrets. The man abruptly stepped back. "I'll return with the appropriate documentation," he said dryly, turning on his heels and leaving the hospital with hurried steps. Sarah stood still, her mind connecting invisible dots. The melody, Wolf's reaction, the stranger's behavior, everything seemed part of a bigger puzzle. That night, as she reviewed old family albums in her apartment, with Wolf dozing at her feet, the director had given in to her request to take him temporarily, she found something that chilled her blood. In a yellowed photograph, her grandmother held a necklace identical to the one they had found with the baby. Her hands trembled as she read the inscription on the back of the photo: "Guardians of the Moon, 1985. The symbol on the necklace, she now remembered, was the emblem of an ancient organization that her grandmother had mentioned in whispers, stories that Sarah had dismissed as old people's tales. A noise in the hallway startled her. Wolf immediately stood up, his ears alert. Through the crack under the door, she could see the shadow of someone motionless. Sarah held her breath, her heart beating fast. After what seemed like an eternity, the shadow moved and disappeared. With trembling hands, Sarah dialed the number of Mrs. Carter, the social worker. The response she received confirmed her suspicions. There was no Dr. Frank Thompson in the department. As the night progressed, Sarah began to notice details she had overlooked before. The mark on Wolf's neck wasn't just from a common collar. It had a pattern similar to the symbol on the medallion, and the melody that had played in the hospital, according to her grandmother's records, was an ancient song used by the Guardians of the Moon. In the neonatal unit, the baby slept peacefully, oblivious to the mystery surrounding him. Sarah had installed an additional security camera in his room and doubled the guard staff. Her medical instinct told her the child was in danger, but it was her personal instinct that whispered that this was just the beginning. A hospital employee, Mike, approached her during her night round. "Doctor, there's something you should know," he whispered, looking nervously around. "The man who came today. I saw him talking to Robert, the night shift security guard. He handed him something. It looked like money." The information fell like a weight in Sarah's stomach. The hospital, which had always been her sanctuary, no longer seemed safe. As she absent-mindedly stroked Wolf's head, she made a decision. She needed to uncover the truth about the Guardians of the Moon, and fast. In her pocket, the necklace seemed to palpitate with a life of its own, as if it held secrets struggling to come to light. Wolf looked at her with his intelligent eyes as if he understood exactly what she was thinking. "What secrets do you hold, my friend?" Sarah whispered. "And why do I feel that my grandmother is connected to all of this?" The full moon peeked through the hospital window, bathing everything in its silver light. Somewhere in the city, a man made a phone call. "We've found her. She has the necklace and the wolf. The plan must be accelerated." The night wind carried with it the echo of an ancient melody, and with it, the promise that secrets buried for decades were about to come to light. Grandmother Evelyn's house remained exactly as it was the last time Sarah had visited, 5 years ago. The small garden, though somewhat neglected, was still brimming with medicinal plants and wildflowers. The faded blue facade and clay pots in the windows told stories of decades past. Sarah had decided to take a day off to investigate, bringing Wolf with her and a backpack full of old documents she had found in her own apartment. The social worker, Mrs. Carter, had committed to personally watching over the baby during her absence. "Come on, Wolf," she murmured as she inserted the key into the rusty lock. The animal followed her closely, his behavior more restless than usual. Upon entering, the smell of incense and dried herbs hit her like a wave of memories. The walls were still covered with ancient tapestries bearing symbols similar to those on the necklace, something she had never really noticed during her childhood. Wolf began to sniff the air intently, heading directly towards her grandmother's old study. The study was a small room, filled with ancient books and curious objects. Sarah remembered being forbidden to enter here when she was a child. "It's just a room full of old memories," her grandmother used to say with a mysterious smile. As Sarah examined the dusty shelves, Wolf stopped in front of a particular tapestry, gently scratching the wall with his paw. As she approached, Sarah noticed that the tapestry showed an intricate scene, silver wolves surrounding a full moon, with ancient symbols woven into the borders. "What is this?" she muttered, moving the tapestry. Behind it, she found a small wooden door carved with the same symbol as the necklace. With trembling hands, Sarah looked for a way to open it. It was then that she noticed the necklace she carried fit perfectly into an indentation in the wood. Upon inserting it, a soft click was heard. Inside the secret compartment, she found a worn leather diary and an intricately carved wooden box. The diary was dated 1985, the same year as the photograph she had found. "Dear Amanda," the first entry began, "if you're reading this, it means the time has come for you to know the truth about the Guardians of the Moon." Sarah sat in her grandmother's old armchair with Wolf at her feet and began to read. The pages revealed an incredible story. The Guardians of the Moon were an ancient order dedicated to protecting special children, children born with a unique connection to nature and their guardians, the wolves. "Each generation," her grandmother wrote, "a child is born marked by the moon, destined to maintain the balance between the natural world and the human world. These children are protected by special wolves raised and trained by the guardians." As she read, the pieces began to fall into place. The mark on Wolf's neck wasn't from a common collar. It was the mark of a guardian, and the baby she had found. A noise at the front of the house interrupted her reading. Wolf immediately went on alert, his fur bristling. Sarah held her breath, looking for a way out. The study window overlooked a small backyard. It was her only option. Just as the study door began to open, Sarah and Wolf jumped out the window. The sound of breaking glass was followed by shouts and hurried footsteps. They ran through narrow alleys, the afternoon sun casting long shadows that seemed to chase them. Sarah could hear their pursuers not far behind. "This way," she heard someone shout. In her haste, Sarah stumbled and the contents of her backpack spilled out. As she hurriedly picked up the diary, the wooden box opened, revealing its contents: a series of old photographs and a pendant that matched the baby's necklace. One of the photos immediately caught her attention. It showed her grandmother holding a baby, and next to her a young wolf that bore a striking resemblance to her current companion. "It can't be," Sarah whispered, looking at Wolf, who was watching her with his intelligent eyes. The sound of approaching footsteps brought her back to reality. She quickly gathered everything and continued running, this time towards the only place she considered safe, the old monastery on the outskirts of the city. As she ran, the words from the diary echoed in her mind. "The true guardians never die. They are only reborn when they are most needed." The sun was beginning to set when they finally reached the abandoned monastery. Sarah closed the heavy wooden doors behind them and collapsed exhausted against a wall. In the dim light of the ancient building, she took out the diary and photographs again. The last entry, dated just months before her grandmother's death, contained a warning. "The circle is about to be completed. The last guardian will be born when the new moon turns red. Those who seek to break the balance will try to find him. Amanda, if you're reading this, you must protect the child and his guardian. The melody is the key." Sarah looked at Wolf, who had sat in front of her with an almost human expression. "You knew all along, didn't you? That's why you saved the baby." A distant howl broke the silence of the evening. Wolf tensed, his ears alert. Somewhere in the city, church bells began to toll, their melody mixing with the wind blowing through the ancient corridors of the monastery. Night was falling, and with it, the secrets of the Guardians of the Moon were beginning to reveal themselves. But Sarah knew this was just the beginning. The answers she sought were somewhere between the pages of her grandmother's diary and in the memories of a wolf that seemed to have lived more than one life. The dim light of dusk filtered through the broken stained glass windows of the monastery, creating multicolored patterns on the dusty floor. Sarah, sitting on a worn wooden bench, continued reading her grandmother's diary while Wolf kept guard near the entrance. The children marked by the moon, read a particularly revealing page, are born with a silver crescent-shaped mark on the nape of their neck. Their guardians recognize them instinctively, for they share an ancestral bond that transcends time. Sarah closed the diary abruptly, remembering something crucial. She stood up with a start and began to pace nervously through the central nave of the monastery. "The baby," she muttered to herself, "when I first examined him, he had a silver mark on the nape of his neck that I attributed to a birthmark." Wolf raised his head, his eyes gleaming with a flash of recognition. Sarah approached him and knelt by his side, carefully studying the mark on his neck that she had previously mistaken for the imprint of a collar. "It wasn't an ordinary collar that left you this mark, was it?" "It's a guardian's mark," she whispered, gently running her fingers through the silver fur. "And you've been waiting all this time." A metallic sound from outside interrupted her thoughts. Wolf immediately went on alert, growling low. Sarah moved silently towards one of the side windows and observed through the stained glass. 3 figures were moving in the shadows of the monastery garden. One of them was the fake Dr. Thompson. The other 2 were men she hadn't seen before, but who moved with the precision of experienced hunters. "They have to be here," she heard one of them say. "The tracker indicates that the necklace is nearby." Sarah instinctively touched the necklace hanging from her neck. Of course, it must have some sort of tracking device. She quickly took it off, but instead of discarding it, an idea began to form in her mind. From the bottom of her backpack, she took out the wooden box she had found in her grandmother's house. Inside, in addition to the photographs, she had found several small objects that now took on new meaning. A silver whistle, an antique compass, and what appeared to be an ornate key. Her fingers brushed the whistle, and without thinking too much, she brought it to her lips. It emitted no sound audible to her, but Wolf reacted immediately, his ears moving with interest. At that moment, the melody she had heard in the hospital came back to her mind. Her grandmother used to hum it while working in her herb garden. She began to hum it softly, and something extraordinary happened. Wolf approached her and touched the antique compass with his muzzle. The needle began to spin erratically before stopping, pointing towards a specific direction, an apparently solid wall on the east side of the monastery. With cautious steps, Sarah approached the wall, humming the melody. As she did so, she noticed that some of the symbols carved into the stone began to glow faintly with a silver light. "The melody is the key," she repeated the words from the diary. With trembling hands, she inserted the ornate key into what appeared to be a natural crack in the stone. The sound of footsteps approaching down the main corridor of the monastery made her act faster. She turned the key while continuing to hum, and a section of the wall moved silently, revealing a dark passage. "Over here!" she heard one of the men shout. Without hesitation, Sarah and Wolf entered the secret passage. The wall closed behind them, just as the lights from their pursuers' flashlights illuminated the spot where they had been seconds before. The tunnel was narrow and damp, dimly lit by small crystals embedded in the walls that emitted a faint bluish glow. Sarah took out her phone to use as a flashlight, but was surprised to see she had a message from Nurse Emily. "Doctor, something's wrong. Robert the guard tried to enter the neonatal unit after hours. The baby is safe, but you need to come back soon." As they advanced through the tunnel, Sarah began to piece things together. Her grandmother had been more than a simple healer. She was a guardian of the moon, part of an ancient order dedicated to protecting these special children and their wolf guardians. The tunnel began to descend in a spiral, and the air grew colder. The crystals in the walls glowed more intensely as they advanced, revealing ancient symbols and writings on the walls. "This is incredible," Sarah murmured, stopping to examine one of the symbols. It was identical to the one on the necklace, but there was something more, an inscription underneath that read, "The circle must be completed when the new moon turns red." A distant howl echoed through the tunnel, but this time it wasn't threatening. Wolf responded with a soft whine as if recognizing a familiar call. Suddenly, the tunnel widened, leading into a circular chamber. In the center was a stone pedestal with a polished surface that reflected the light from the crystals. Above it, carved into the rock, was a map of the city, but not as it was now, but as it had been centuries ago. Sarah approached the pedestal, noticing that there were spaces that seemed designed to fit something. She took out the necklace and, following her intuition, placed it in one of the spaces. The map began to glow, lines of silver light tracing paths through the ancient city. They all converged on one point: the hospital. "It can't be a coincidence," Sarah whispered. "The baby was abandoned near the hospital because it's a sacred place for the Guardians." A distant noise alerted her that their pursuers might have found another entrance to the tunnel. Quickly, she took out her phone and photographed the luminous map before retrieving the necklace. "We need to get back to the hospital," she told Wolf. "But first we need to make one more stop." The tunnel had several branches, and guided by Wolf they took a path that seemed to ascend. After what felt like an eternity, they emerged through a hidden door in what Sarah recognized as the basement of the old city library. Night had completely fallen over Silver Springs, and as they hurried through the shadowy streets, Sarah knew they were in a race against time. The baby was in danger, and the answers she needed to protect him were scattered like pieces of an ancient puzzle she was just beginning to understand. The streets of Silver Springs, normally bustling and full of nightlife, seemed strangely silent as Sarah and Wolf moved between the shadows. The moon, a thin silver line in the sky, barely illuminated their path. Their first destination was Mrs. Carter's house, the social worker. Sarah needed to make sure the baby was safe and obtain more information before returning to the hospital. Upon arriving at Mrs. Carter's modest house, Sarah noticed something strange. The door was ajar and no lights were visible inside. Wolf growled softly, his fur bristling. "Stay here," Sarah whispered, but Wolf ignored her, moving forward cautiously. The interior of the house was in disarray, as if there had been a struggle. Sarah found Mrs. Carter unconscious on the living room floor. She quickly checked her vital signs. She was alive but needed medical attention. As Sarah called for an ambulance, Wolf was insistently sniffing an open planner on the desk. Upon approaching, Sarah noticed an address hastily scribbled: 23 Sunnyvale Street. Ask for Amelia. "Amelia?" Sarah muttered, the name resonating in her memory. She vaguely remembered a friend of her grandmother's, an older woman who used to visit them when she was a child. With the ambulance on its way, Sarah decided to follow this new lead. Sunnyvale Street wasn't far, and every minute counted. Upon reaching the indicated address, they found themselves in front of an old colonial house. Wolf stopped in front of the door, his attitude alerting Sarah that something important was inside. Before she could knock, the door opened. An older woman, with white hair tied in a bun and piercing eyes, greeted them. "I've been expecting you, Sarah," the woman said in a serene voice. "I'm Amelia, and we have much to discuss." The interior of the house was a living testament to the history of the Guardians of the Moon. Ancient tapestries, similar to those Sarah had seen in her grandmother's house, adorned the walls. Shelves filled with old books and mysterious artifacts filled every corner. "Your grandmother Evelyn and I," Amelia began as she served them an herbal tea, "were the last active Guardians in Silver Springs. We knew this day would come, although we hoped to have more time to prepare you." Sarah listened attentively while absent-mindedly petting Wolf, who had laid down at her feet. "The child you found," Amelia continued, "is the last of an ancestral line of protectors. His birth was prophesied centuries ago, and there are those who seek to use his power for their own ends." "But what power?" Sarah interrupted. "He's just a baby." Amelia smiled sadly. "He's much more than that. The children marked by the moon have the ability to connect the natural world with the human world in a way that goes beyond our understanding. In the wrong hands, that power could be used to manipulate the forces of nature, cause disasters, even control minds." Sarah thought of the baby, so small and vulnerable in his hospital crib. "And Wolf? What's his role in all of this?" "The guardian wolves," Amelia explained, "are the natural protectors of these children. They share a special bond that allows them to communicate and work together to maintain balance. Wolf has been waiting for years for the birth of this child." Suddenly, a series of distant howls broke the silence of the night. Wolf immediately stood up, his ears alert. "It's a warning," said Amelia, her face darkening. "The others are near. We must act quickly." Amelia went to an ancient wardrobe and took out an intricately carved wooden box. Upon opening it, she revealed a set of objects: an ancient map of the city, a vial with a silvery liquid, and a medallion that matched the necklace Sarah was wearing. "These are the sacred artifacts of the Guardians," she explained. "The map will show you the places of power in the city. The moon elixir will protect the child during the ritual, and the medallion, so well, that's something you'll have to discover for yourself. Sarah took the objects, feeling the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. What should I do now? You must complete the circle, Amelia responded. Take the child and wolf to the sacred place revealed on the map. But be careful. Those who seek the child will stop at nothing. Just then, Sarah's phone vibrated with an urgent message from Emily. Doctor, they're here. They're trying to take the baby. We need help. Sarah jumped to her feet. We have to go. The baby is in danger. Amelia nodded gravely. Go. I'll take care of diverting the others. Remember, Sarah, the melody is the key and love is the most powerful force of all. As Sarah and Wolf hurried towards the hospital, the night seemed to close in around them. The stars shone with unusual intensity, as if the sky itself was aware of the drama unfolding in the streets of Silver Springs. In her mind, Sarah went over everything she had learned. The baby, Wolf, the guardians, the ritual. Everything was connected in a cosmic dance that she was just beginning to understand. As they turned a corner, they saw the hospital in the distance. Emergency lights were flashing, and sirens could be heard in the distance. Sarah quickened her pace with Wolf running by her side. Come on, friend, she murmured. We have a baby to save and a destiny to fulfill. The new moon shone faintly in the sky, a silent omen of the events that were about to unfold. Sarah knew that the next few hours would determine not only the fate of the baby and Wolf, but possibly the very balance between the natural world and the human world. With each step towards the hospital, Sarah felt she was approaching not just a confrontation, but an awakening. Her grandmother's legacy, the secrets of the Guardians of the Moon, and her own destiny were about to converge on a night that would change everything forever. Chaos reigned in the hospital when Sarah and Wolf arrived. Emergency lights were flashing, staff were running back and forth, and confused shouts and orders could be heard throughout the corridors. Sarah made her way to the neonatal unit, with Wolf glued to her heels. The security guards, too busy with the general commotion, barely noticed the unusual pair slipping through the crowd. Upon reaching the unit, Sarah found Emily struggling with the corrupt guard, Robert, who was trying to enter the baby's room. Stop! Sarah shouted. Robert turned, surprised, a moment that Emily took advantage of to hit him with a metal tray. The man fell to the floor, stunned. Dr. Rivers, Emily exclaimed, relieved. You arrived just in time. They tried to take the baby, but I managed to lock him in the intensive care room. Sarah nodded, her mind working at full speed. Well done, Emily. I need you to do something else for me. Evacuate this floor of the hospital. Make up a gas leak, a bomb threat, whatever. We need to get everyone out of here. Emily looked at her confused, but the determination in Sarah's eyes convinced her. She nodded and quickly walked away to carry out the task. Sarah turned to Wolf. Watch the entrance. Let me know if anyone approaches. The animal seemed to understand, taking position near the unit doors. With her heart racing, Sarah entered the intensive care room. The baby was there, awake but strangely calm. When he saw her, he reached out his little hands towards her, as if recognizing her. Hello, little one, Sarah whispered, carefully lifting him. We're going to keep you safe. She took out the map Amelia had given her and spread it out on a nearby table. When she touched it, lines of silver light began to trace paths across the surface, converging on one point, the hospital roof. Of course, Sarah muttered, the closest point to the sky. A howl from Wolf alerted her. Hurried footsteps were approaching down the hallway. There was no time to lose. Sarah took the baby, the vial of moon elixir, and the medallion, and headed for the emergency stairs. Wolf followed them, bringing up the rear. As they hurriedly climbed the stairs, Sarah could hear voices and footsteps not far behind. Their pursuers were close. Upon reaching the roof, the cold night wind greeted them. The new moon, barely visible, seemed to silently observe them. Sarah looked around, searching for some sign of what she should do. That's when she saw it. An ancient stone circle in the center of the roof, almost hidden under years of neglect. As she approached, she noticed symbols engraved in the stones, similar to those she had seen in the monastery. This must be the place, she said, placing the baby in the center of the circle. Suddenly, the roof door burst open. The fake Dr. Thompson and two more men emerged, their faces a mixture of triumph and fury. The game is over, Doctor, Thompson said, slowly advancing. Hand over the child and no one will get hurt. Wolf stood between them and Sarah, growling menacingly. Sarah, meanwhile, uncapped the vial of moon elixir. You don't understand what's at stake, she replied, her voice firm despite the fear she felt. This child doesn't belong to you. Thompson smiled maliciously. Oh, we understand perfectly. The power to control nature itself. Can you imagine what we could achieve? As he spoke, the men began to surround the circle. Sarah knew she had to act quickly. She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the words of her grandmother and Amelia. The melody is the key, she whispered to herself. And then, in the midst of chaos and danger, Sarah began to sing. The ancient melody of the Guardians of the Moon emerged from her lips, clear and powerful. The effect was immediate. The stone circle began to glow with a silver light. Wolf howled, joining the melody with his own voice. The baby, far from being frightened, laughed and reached his hands towards the sky. Thompson and his men stepped back, surprised and fearful at the supernatural spectacle. Sarah continued singing as she poured the moon elixir around the baby. The light intensified, forming a protective barrier around the circle. Suddenly, the medallion in her hand began to vibrate. Instinctively, Sarah placed it on the baby's chest. A beam of moonlight, impossibly bright for a new moon night, descended upon them. Sarah felt an ancient and powerful energy flowing through her, connecting her with the baby, with Wolf, with the earth itself. Images flooded her mind. Ancient guardians, secret rituals, the delicate balance between the natural world and the human world. She understood in that moment of cosmic clarity the true meaning of her heritage and her destiny. Thompson, desperate, tried to cross the light barrier only to be repelled by an invisible force. "No!" he shouted, his face contorted with rage and frustration. The light intensified even more, blinding in its brightness. Sarah felt the baby rising slightly, surrounded by a silver aura. Wolf howled one last time, a sound that seemed to resonate throughout the city, and then, as suddenly as it had begun, it all ended. The light faded, leaving only the soft glow of the stars. Sarah blinked, her eyes adjusting to the darkness. The baby slept peacefully in her arms, a faint silver mark glowing on his forehead. Wolf approached, gently brushing his muzzle against the child's cheek. Thompson and his men had disappeared, as if they had never been there. In their place, Sarah saw translucent figures surrounding the circle, the spirits of ancient guardians, including her grandmother Evelyn, smiling in approval before vanishing into the night air. "We did it," Sarah whispered, hugging the baby and petting Wolf. "The circle is complete." As dawn began to tinge the sky pink and gold, Sarah understood that this was not an end, but a new beginning. As the new guardian of the moon, she had a mission to fulfill and a legacy to protect. With the baby in her arms and Wolf by her side, Sarah looked towards the horizon, ready to face whatever the future held for them. The adventure, after all, was just beginning. The first rays of the sun peeked over the horizon as Sarah, with the baby in her arms and Wolf by her side, descended from the hospital roof. The building, which just hours ago had been a chaos of activity and danger, was now plunged into an almost reverential silence. In the reception area, she found Emily, who was waiting for her with a mixture of concern and curiosity on her face. "Doctor, Rivers, what happened up there? We saw strange lights and was that a howl?" Sarah smiled tiredly. "It's a long story, Emily. For now, I need you to help me arrange the baby's discharge, and we'll need to falsify some documents." Emily looked at her surprised but nodded. After what she had witnessed that night, she was willing to trust Sarah's judgment. While Emily took care of the paperwork, Sarah took the opportunity to examine the baby. The silver mark on his forehead had disappeared, but she could feel a subtle energy emanating from him. The child looked at her with curious eyes, as if he understood much more than he should at his age. "I'll call you Liam," Sarah whispered. "It seems appropriate, don't you think?" Wolf emitted a soft whine of approval. With the documents in order, thanks to Emily's skillful manipulation, Sarah prepared to leave the hospital. But before that, she had one last task to complete. She headed to the director's office, Dr. Johnson, who received her with an expression of confusion and amazement. "Doctor, Rivers, can you explain to me what the hell happened last night? I have reports of evacuations, intruders, and even a wolf." Sarah took a deep breath. "Doctor Johnson, what I'm going to tell you will sound incredible. but I need you to listen carefully." Over the next hour, Sarah told him an edited version of the events, focusing on the corruption within the hospital and the conspiracy to kidnap the baby. She omitted the supernatural details, but made it clear that the child needed protection. Dr. Johnson, although visibly skeptical at first, seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. "This is quite difficult to believe, Sarah, but I trust your judgment. What do you need from me?" "Time," Sarah replied. "I need an extended leave, and I need you to keep everything related to this baby's admission to the hospital a secret." The director nodded slowly. "Consider it done. But Sarah, be careful. Whatever you've gotten yourself into, it seems dangerous." Sarah smiled gratefully. "I will. And thank you, really." As she left the hospital, the sun was already high in the sky. Silver Springs was waking up to a new day, oblivious to the extraordinary events that had taken place during the night. Sarah headed to her apartment, aware that she couldn't stay there for long. She needed a safe place to raise Liam and begin her new life as a guardian. As she packed a bag with the essentials, her mind was working at full speed. She needed to contact Amelia, learn more about her new responsibilities, and find a safe refuge. A soft knock on the door startled her. When she opened it, she found herself face to face with a young woman with a serene appearance. "Hello, Sarah," the woman said with a warm smile. "My name is Sophie. Amelia sent me to help you." Sarah looked at her cautiously. "How do I know I can trust you?" Sophie extended her hand, revealing a tattoo on her wrist, the same symbol Sarah had seen on the necklace and the medallion. "I'm a guardian like you, and we have a lot of work to do." Sarah nodded, allowing Sophie to enter. As the newcomer played with Liam and petted Wolf as if she had known them all her life, Sarah realized that this was just the beginning of a much longer and more complex path than she had imagined. "Where will we go?" Sarah asked as she finished packing. Sophie smiled mysteriously. "To a place where the secrets of the Guardians have been preserved for centuries. A place where Liam can grow up safely and where you can learn to master your new powers." "Powers?" Sarah looked at her surprised. "Oh, Sarah," Sophie laughed softly. "Last night you only saw the tip of the iceberg. Being a guardian of the moon involves much more than protecting a child. You have the power to communicate with nature, to heal, to see beyond the veils of time. But all in due time." As they left the apartment, Sarah took one last look at her old life. The hospital, her career as a doctor, the routine she had known. It all was left behind. Ahead of her opened a path full of mysteries, dangers, and wonders. Liam cooed happily in her arms. Wolf walked confidently by her side, and Sophie guided them towards an uncertain but promising future. The sun shone brightly over Silver Springs, as if nature itself was celebrating the birth of a new guardian and the beginning of an era of renewed balance between the natural world and the human world. As they drove away in Sophie's car, Sarah couldn't help but feel a mixture of excitement and fear of the unknown. But one thing was certain: her life and Liam's would never be the same again. The journey was just beginning, and the secrets of the Guardians of the Moon were waiting to be discovered.